I'm delighted to have with me three inspirational guests to discuss the topic of women in ringing: Elva Ainsworth, Julia Cater and Tessa Simpson. They've all taken on leadership roles in ringing. For example, Elva is on the board of the Ringing World, the Bell Ringers magazine. Tessa was Master of the College Youths in 2015, and Julia is this year's Chief Judge for the National 12-Bell Striking Competition. So Julia, I'm going to ask you first. How do you think that being a woman has affected your experience of bell ringing, if at all?
Do you know, I'm not entirely sure that it has. And I think one of the reasons for that is that actually I learnt to ring when I was 7. I was very, very young. And I realise now that I think my dad actually created quite a lot of opportunities for me. Nothing was an issue because of my gender or indeed my age. So, for example, he used his contacts to allow me to go up to St Paul's and ring when I was about, 9 or 10. And I remember that you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. There was so much tension about this young little slip of a thing, a girl at that, who was on a great big pile of boxes on the treble, and was she going to get her first backstroke up for this touch of Stedman Sinks? And that opportunity wouldn't have been available to me at all. But my dad created it.
What motivates you to take part in women-only ringing?
There's definitely a different atmosphere in the ringing room when there's only women. There's less ego, it's more supportive somehow, and it enables people to try things that they wouldn't perhaps have ordinarily done. So, for example, I've turned the tenor into a peal of O-rabs, which is a relatively flash thing to have done. There's no way on earth that I would have been able to do that in a mixed environment. So it's just about providing a safe opportunity and a supportive opportunity to try new things.
I didn't quite catch. You said you turned the tenor to
a peal of O-rabs, which is 5 different Splice Maximus methods. So it was,
It's really hard, Cathy. You just need to know that.
Sorry, it's a bit like name dropping, but the point is it was quite complex, and I had that opportunity because it was a female-only a band, so that's the point.
Tessa, how do you think, if at all, being a woman has affected your experience of bell ringing?
I think I was very lucky and had a similar story to Julia, really, in that I was given many opportunities at a very early age. My parents are both bell ringers, and when I was 10 I was given the opportunity to learn to ring, and given lots of opportunities because I was learning at a 12 bell tower, and right from rounds and call changes right up to Ryan, Bristol, complicated Maximus methods, and I was encouraged to try and call some things as well from an early age. So I've had the confidence to challenge people that didn't necessarily think I had the ability or the confidence to do things did. So I think in general, I think I've had a very positive experience, but there have been times where I've had to say, can I do this or can I do that, please? Because I can probably do a bit more than you think I can.
Okay, on to Elva.
Hi.
How do you think that being a woman has affected your experience of bell ringing?
It's super interesting listening to Julia and Tessa, because I would have said the same as them, but then what happened was, so I learned when I was 12, my father and mother rang, but my mother wasn't actually ringing at the time when I was 12. My mother came back to ringing like 10 years after I started ringing. And my mother started pointing out all the infuriating things that my father would do in terms of running practices and allowing women to ring the bigger bells. And to be absolutely honest with you, I wouldn't have said that being a woman had affected my experience at all until she started querying it and challenging it. And then I started seeing it. And then I saw it everywhere. And so now when I look back, what I see is that I was a 12-year-old, my sister was 10, we learnt on a very heavy ring of 6. There were only 6 bells at Mary's Amersham when we rang there. 1900 weight, tenor, went really rough. I could only just about cope with the 3rd, but I was allowed to ring the 4th sometimes. And all that seemed totally fine to me. Why would I want to ring further round the back? It was way too hard. I did have the occasional go, and my father did encourage me. And I thought I was given exactly the same opportunities as everybody else. But there were teenage boys that came along after me, and they were really encouraged to have a go on the back bells. Like, really cajoling them. Oh, come and have a go. Oh, and then joking when they went wrong. And it's a different conversation with them about them experimenting. The women in my band, and we're talking the early 70s, 1970s, there were women in the band and they never conducted. So why would I? So there was no expectation in me. There was no disappointment, but it was still a box that I was put in, and I kept myself there quite comfortably. I didn't mind the fact that the College U's was seen as the preeminent society, and there were no women at all for such a long time. It had a big impact, I think, on the culture of ringing as a whole. There's very subtle messages that certainly I received. So, yeah, I think it's complex.
Julia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Elva was saying these were some of the assumptions in the 70s, but in preparation for this podcast, I actually asked one of my daughters on the topic, and she said, "Oh, God, yeah, it still goes on, Mum." And she gave me an example from one of the Ringing World youth competitions a couple of years ago. I was busy because I was judging, so I wasn't there. And it was up at Pier Head in Liverpool, and all the team waltzed into Pier Head. And she said she desperately wanted to have a good go ringing some of the bigger bells, but was only allowed to ring as far around as the 5th. And she said some of the other boys, who were smaller than her, some of them, and younger than her, and the person making the decisions didn't know who they were from anybody or what their ability was. They were all proactively encouraged to ring the big bells, and she desperately wanted to and was withheld back from that. And so these just chimed so much what Elva was saying about when some of the boys were proactively cajoled into it, and here's a sort of 2 or 3 year ago example of the exact same thing.
Elva, you're a business owner and an author in the HR field. Do you think that the insights that you get through this affect how you perceive gender issues in the bell ringing world?
I guess it's got to, hasn't it? I talk with female and male senior executives on a regular basis, coaching them on their leadership. I work with them on their reputations. I look at how they're perceived in the world. So I'm acutely aware of how these things work. And what I see is that ringing is simply behind the corporate world. That's my perception. And it's not surprising given the demographics of ringing is pretty old. Is it that about 65-70% are over 50? Whereas in the corporate world, it's not like that. It's more under 50. So we're in a bit of a time lag situation here. And there's definitely been a shift in attitudes over the last few decades, for sure. Huge shifts. I find it quite jarring to go into a ringing environment and to be a leader. Very often the ringing ear to a woman's voice isn't as powerful as to a man's voice saying the exact same thing. And this is very hard to discern and to spot. But once you've clued into it, it happens all the time, especially from the older ringers, which is, again, not surprising. But if that is happening, and that's my hypothesis that it is, then it can very easily undermine your confidence. If you can believe that there's a thing which is stopping the girls being encouraged to ring the heavier bells, there's much more than that going on that's invisibly affecting how we speak up, how we influence what's happening, our reputations. All sorts is happening that we're not very conscious of.
Well, I want to come on to the working group for women in ringing. What was it set up to do and what were its findings?
I set it up at Simon Linford's request. Simon Linford is the president of the Central Council. And it came about because he'd put something out, a list of about 18 names of people who were going to lead steering groups or something like that. I think there was only one woman's name on there. So he said, Julia, go and find out the reason why, when I'm going around thinking of names of people that can do things, why the women's names are not coming up. So I got a team of people. They produced the data that says that there is this thing called a leaky pipeline, which is how we've termed it. But it proved that the distribution of gender at the grassroots day-to-day membership of ringing is roughly 50-50. And then it just drops off as the perceived level of complexity in ringing or the more level of influence in ringing increases.
Did you find out why?
So what we did then is we had a portal where people could submit their stories. And we got nearly 100 different stories of people's experiences, mostly from women, about what was going on to create this drop-off. And I think if you had to boil it down to a couple of things, it was about people being given a lack of opportunity and people lacking in confidence to try things. I remember witnessing someone saying to my youngest daughter when she asked if she could ring the fifth on a ring of 8, and they said, "Are you sure you can manage it?" And of course, it's a perfectly valid question from a tower captain who doesn't want a health or safety incident. But to her, it makes her go, perhaps I can't manage it. And it undermines confidence. And it's a self-fulfilling cycle. If you don't get the opportunity, you lose the confidence. If you lose the confidence, you don't then ask. Or if you get offered something, you say, perhaps I won't, thanks. And there's a sort of reticence to try new things builds in. And so we were getting just lots and lots of stories about this sort of dynamic happening within people's own psyches and so on. And I think there's a big thing here as well about assumptions being made by the decision makers about what people can and cannot do, probably driven by some kind of unconscious biases, maybe, or just our own cultural norms. I can give you an example. So a couple of years ago, my daughters and I went on holiday to a fairly remote place in the UK. And we turned up at the practice night, and as well as another guy turned up, also a visitor. And between us, we made the band up to 8 and clearly boosted their level of what they would be able to ring that night. And all the way through, the other guy, visitor, the male visitor, was asked, "Can you conduct this? Can you do this? Can you ring the tenor? Can you do this?" And I was a bit amused by this at the start, and then I was a bit bemused, and then I was getting a bit annoyed. So in the end, there was a Bob Minor called for, and I got hold of the tenor and said, "Shall I call this one?" And he came out with this phrase again of, oh, can you? Do you think you can? I was like, yeah, I think I can. And it's just, he was just showing just the sort of normal systemic biases and assumptions about, here's a man and here's 3 women, and I'm going to focus all my attention on what the man can do. And he was therefore not utilising us to our full potential to be able to help him and the band. The stories on the website bring out a lot of these assumptions as well, that people who, when they're in positions to be able to make decisions, they're making these assumptions, and it's unhelpful for the band, ultimately, at the end of the day.
Unconscious bias. What is it, Elva?
So it's referring to the fact that we make assumptions about people based on facts about them. It could be your age, gender, hair colour, eye colour, race, all of this sort of thing. And then these judgments affect how you're perceiving this person, how you're hearing them, how you're seeing them in the future. And it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy in a way similar to the self-fulfilling prophecy that Julie was referring to earlier. If you believe, for instance, a woman is unlikely to ring the back bells, then they become unlikely to ring the back bells. So it feeds on itself. It's invisible and it's there, and we all have many unconscious biases all the time.
What should individuals do when they come across something that they think is due to unconscious bias?
Tessa, were you going to say something?
I was going to say challenge it.
Yeah, absolutely. Speak up somehow, say something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people these days, if they are challenged and they're accused of being sexist or whatever, I think most people would be horrified and respond to it accordingly. So, yeah, I would just encourage people to challenge in a friendly way.
Yeah, you don't have to be accusatory at all, do you?
No, not at all. In a friendly way, in a productive way, challenge it.
And what should a tower captain or ringing master be doing?
They should be actively encouraging the women more than they are right now to counteract the cultural pressures and barriers. They should be more conscious than they've ever been and put more effort into it. It doesn't sort itself out naturally because it requires that extra proaction, if you like. They should be asking for feedback as well, actually. Check with people, listen, ask the women what they want to do.
And I would love it if a tower captain would ask for feedback, but also self-reflect. Any decision that anybody makes, tower captain or, people in charge of ringing, they can ask themselves, why did I do it that way? And could I have done it a different way? So why did I ask Joe Bloggs to do this or Mary Smith to do that? And could I have done it a different way? To self-reflect on those questions would be brilliant, actually.
Thank you to my guests, Julia Cater, Elva Ainsworth and Tessa Simpson. This podcast was put together by a team. Special thanks go to Anne Tansley Thomas and John Gwynn, Leslie Belcher, and the Society of the Cambridge Youths for the recording of their ringing.